Hello and welcome to the second video in our LeetCode 75 series where we're going to go through the LeetCode 75 study plan together. And this second question honestly is a doozy and I feel like it should be a little bit further down the line, but here we go. We're going to go through it two ways, kind of the intuitive mathematical approach, which is going to take kind of a lot of line of code, but I think it'll make sense as we go through it. And then we'll go through the second way, which is going to be super fast and super short, but it's kind of mind-blowing that it actually works. So we'll cover both. You might just want to jump to the second solution because it's a lot shorter, but we'll spend some time really making sense of this question because, again, it's kind of a tricky one for maybe your second one if you just decided to jump into the study plan. So we want to see essentially if two strings are made up of some repetitive substring and that it's the same repetitive substring for both. So that's kind of what all this is saying, but let's see what we mean by example here. We can see that string 1 is made up of 2 repetitions of ABC, and string 2 is made up of 1 repetition of ABC, and that makes the greatest common divisor, or greatest common substring, or greatest repeatable substring that makes both of those strings ABC. All right, now the second example maybe is a little confusing at first, but it does make sense if you read it this way, that string 1 is made up of, technically you can only say it's made up of 3 ABs, right? 3 complete multiples of AB. Because you look at string 2 and you say, oh, that's AB, AB, and you look at string 1 and you go, oh, well, there's AB, AB as well, but notice that you essentially have 1.5 AB, ABs. 1.5 4-character things to make up string 1, and we can't have a half of it. We need to have clean division, right? It needs to be an entire 3 multiples of AB and an entire 2 multiples of AB, and that's why this one only has the largest common substring or longest common divisor of just one group of AB. This one has 3 of them, this one has 2 of them, so there we go. Now that actually gets into the approach of how we're going to solve this the first time around, which is by saying, right, let's just look at the lengths of our strings and think about the divisors of our strings. So this one is 6 units long, this one is 4 units long, and if you think about what divides 6, it's either 1 and 6, or it's either 2 and 3, right? So that's telling us, okay, either this is a pattern this whole thing is a 6-unit long pattern, well, but 6 doesn't go into 4 units, so it can't be that. Or it's either just 1 unit length pattern repeated over and over again, and that can't be true because it's not A is written 6 times. It's not 1 character written 6 times. It's, well, 2 characters written 3 times. Now notice it also couldn't be 3 characters, right? 3 characters repeated twice because this group of 3 characters isn't repetitive. So automatically, right, that's kind of our test. We're going to say, what are the divisors of string 1? Well, divisors of 6 are either 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. What about the divisors of 4? Either 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. Now notice what we said in common was just 1 and 2 for both of them, so that's all we need to check. Is this made up of a 2-character long substring repeated over and over again? And is this the same 2-character substring repeated over and over again? Then I have my answer. If not, is it a 1-character repetition over and over and a 1-character repetition over and over? If not, then I'm done, right? So I don't need to check through 1, 2, 3, and 6 because this one doesn't have 3 and 6. I only need to check the common divisors of just the lengths of their strings, and then I'll look at the strings themselves. So that's going to be my approach, and let's get started by first getting the length of string 1 and getting the length of string 2. Now again, also this is going to be the long and tedious approach, but it's the one that I think maybe is more intuitive than the one we're going to see later. All right, from there, let's create a helper function, which is going to be get divisors. And what we're going to do is we're going to take in both of those lengths. And we're going to say, well, my final group of divisors is going to be an empty list. And we'll say for x in range 1, to the min of my string length, because if it's going to divide, it has to be able to be smaller than or equal to the smallest of the 2 numbers, because 6, right, the larger value can't divide 4 at all because 4 isn't big enough to be divided by 6. So that's why we're going with the min there. And also +1 because I do want 4, the length of the smallest string, to actually be included because 1 times 4 is 4. All right, from there, what are we going to do? We're going to say if n when it gets divided by that value x, has 0 remainder. In other words, if it divides cleanly. And m, same thing, when it gets divided by x, has no remainder. That's the module operator. It tells you what your remainder is. So if they both divide cleanly, if they both have a remainder of 0, then go ahead and take my divisors list and let's append x, because it's a common divisor. Now, otherwise, I don't need to do anything, so I don't even need to write an else statement. Finally, I think what I'll do is I'll sort them in reverse order, right? Because I'm looking for the greatest common divisor, so I should start from largest to smallest, and then I can return those divisors. Okay, that's part 1 done. We have a way to figure out the common divisors, and now we need to find a way to essentially check that divisor length and see, is our string made up of a 3-unit long repeating sequence, like this first example here. So we'll say that as we write this code out. So we'll call this one check repetition. And that'll take in a string, and it will take in a divisor. And what we'll do is we'll first form a key, and that key will be my string up to that divisor length. So in other words, if it's a 3-unit divisor that we're checking, right, then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be saying, is everything up to the 3rd character, get everything up to the 3rd character or up to the 3rd index, so the first 3 characters, because I want that to be the thing I'm checking everything else against afterwards. Is everything else made up of these same 3 characters? That's kind of my key. All right, so then what I'll do is I'll say for x in range, 1, because I've already found my first repetition because it was my key, and then up to, right, the length of my string divided by my divisor, and I think we might need to do a +1 here. We might not, but we'll see. We'll test it out. So now what am I going to do? I'm going to essentially say if, and this is going to be a little bit of a mouthful, my string from my divisor, times x. So in other words, I want to be after the first 3 characters. So multiply it by how many I've already come across. And then I need to go now from my divisor times x plus an extra divisor length, because that's what I'm checking against. So now I'm going from like the 3rd to the 6th character. So that's what I'm doing there. I need to add on the extra divisor to go an extra amount to the end. And I need to see, is that group of characters, is that equal to my key? Actually, is it not equal to my key? Because if it's not, I can just break and return false, because it must not be made up of the same repetitive like 3 characters or what have you. Now, otherwise, I'll get through the entire loop so I can return true, that essentially my string is made up of a 3-unit long sequence over and over and over again for as many times as I need. Okay, so we're finally done. Let's get our divisors for n and m. And then what we can do is we can say for value in divisors. For value in divisors. And then this is going to be another big nasty if statement, but we can say if check repetition for string 1 for the value in question is equal to check repetition for string 2 for the value in question. And if both of those are true, right, because they can't just be both falses, they need to both come out to be true. So that's a way of writing it. Are they both the same, and are they both the same and true? And then also I need to check, and you might not think we need to, but I'll explain why. I need to check, is string 1, the first key, equal to string 2, that first key essentially. So if all of that's true, goodness, then we can return either string 1 or string 2 because they're made up of the same sequence up to the val. And if not, I never got a return statement, so I can return a blank string. Now, the question is, why do we need to throw this in there as well? And it's because when we do this check repetition function, right, we're only checking that like string 1 is made up of the same 3-character sequence, but it's its own set of 3 characters that it started with and then repeated. So in other words, maybe string 1 could be made up of ABC, 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 and maybe string 2 could be made up of DEF, DEF, DEF. Well, they're both made up of 3-character strings, so this first whole section would all come out to true, but they're not actually made up of the same 3 characters, so that's what we need that second check for. I know they're both made up of 3 characters repeating, but are they the same 3 characters for both strings? And I think after all that, get divisors n and m, not map. I think we're good. And let's run it and submit it. Awesome. So we found an answer, but it doesn't have the best runtime. And also you can see that that was a lot of code to write, but hopefully you kind of digested it. Now let's really break your brain and show you the like true answer to this one. It's really darn cool. So I think I'm still going to need this, right? But what we can do is let's maybe investigate that second case, the AB along with the AB. So what someone figured out is that, hey, what if I put this together, right? And I'm putting a comma here to say that it was this first group of 6 and then the group of 4. And then also, what if I did that in the other order? So what if I put string 2 first and then string 1 first? Well, notice that essentially the comma is there for us to see which one we put together first, but these should end up being the same. They should end up being identical. Now, this is kind of a weird like math fact, but let's think about this. This is 6 characters long, and this is 4 characters long. They both share a divisor of 2. When you put them together, right, in any order, they're 10 characters long, and guess what? 10 is also able to be divided by 2. So not only is this, when you put both strings together, like going to be the same length and composed of the same substring, but if they are composed of the same repetitive substring over and over again, then it won't matter what order you add these in. So we can actually then just say if string 1 plus string 2 is not equal to string 2 plus string 1, then I can just go ahead and return false. Now, what this is actually handling, if you think about it, is this is handling a lot. It's handling, are these two made up of the same repetitive subsequence, right? Like, are these essentially maybe 3 groups of the same thing written and 2 groups of the same thing written over and over repetitively? It's checking for that. So it's not only covering that, but it's also covering a lot of other cases, like are they made up of the same substring over and over again? And yes, they are, because that's how when I add them together in any order, I still get the same like 10 character string, because it reads the same left to right because it's composed of the same thing inside for both of them. So this is carrying a lot of weight. And so if it is, right, then actually all I need to do is just return string 1 or string 2, right, and I don't need to, come up with my own greatest common divisor formula. I can just use the one from the math import right there. Everything up to the GCD of them both. And believe it or not, that's your whole code. Whoops. Oh, I don't want to return false. Sorry, I want to return a blank string. All right, there we go. And now let's run it. And now it says it runs slow, but hey, let's run it one more time. I think it'll run pretty fast. Yeah. So it's really fast, really efficient. I know sometimes you get caught with the like randomizer of a bad test case when you actually have a really good solution. Don't be too worried about that. But this is really, really kind of crazy that this works. And this is why I say I almost feel like this question shouldn't be an easy. It feels like a medium, because that's a pretty big leap to turn all the code we wrote into such a succinct little answer. But all the power really is right here, right? Again, this is doing a lot of checks in one little if statement. It's checking, are both of your strings made up of some repetitive thing? Because that's why I can add the second string to it, because I know it's made up of the same parts. So number 1, I can add to it, and then it doesn't matter what order I add, because not only are they made up of the same parts, but because they're made up of the same parts repeated some indistinguishable amount of times, then I know that these should be equal if they are. And otherwise, they aren't made up of the same substring, because the order will matter when I add them. And so I know they're not made up of the same common like divisor. Pretty darn crazy. Hope you got a lot out of it, and I'll see you in the next video.